In the wide, windswept steppes beneath the eternal blue sky, where horses thundered like storms, and survival rested on the edge of a blade, a child was born in 1162 to the Borjigan clan, a boy named Temujin, destined to shake the world. The steppes knew no mercy. They recognized only strength, loyalty, and the will to endure. Temujin's birth carried omen and conflict. His father, Yasuge, a respected leader, believed the boy would command fate itself. Yet fate struck first. When Temujin was 9, Yasuge was poisoned by rival Tatars while returning from arranging his son's future marriage. With his father's death, the fragile protection of clan loyalty shattered. The Taichud tribe, once allies, abandoned the widow Hoylan and her children on the cold steppe, leaving them to starvation and wolves, believing the family too weak to survive. Hunger became Temujin's first enemy, fear his constant companion. He learned to fish icy rivers with bare hands, to dig roots from frozen ground, to sleep listening for hoofbeats of raiders. When a band of Taichud warriors attacked to capture him and enslave his family, Temujin evaded them until they seized him at last, bound his neck with a wooden yoke, and paraded him like prey. Yet even as a child, his eyes carried a fire that unnerved men. One night, under silent stars, he knocked down a guard and escaped into the river reeds. He did not run blindly. He hid, waited, studied the fear of his captors, learning the first rule of survival. Freedom belonged only to those bold enough to seize it. This early suffering carved into him a cold clarity. Mercy was rare on the steppe, and loyalty was earned in hardship, not blood. He saw his relatives turn their backs, saw hunger steal innocence from his siblings, saw his mother stand proud despite loss, teaching him that strength was not rage but purpose. When his half-brother Begter hoarded food while the family starved, Temujin made a brutal decision and killed him. A moment that scarred him, yet affirmed a truth the steppe demanded. No one, not even kin, could threaten the survival of those he vowed to protect. Still, Temujin was not born cruel. He was shaped by a world where softness meant death. He learned loyalty from his mother's unwavering resolve, courage from the endless wind, patience from watching hawks hunt across frozen skies. Unlike steppe nobles drunk on tradition, he dreamed of a world where worth was earned by loyalty and skill, not birth. He would not forget betrayal, but he would also not forget those who helped him, like Jamuka, the childhood friend who once shared his bed blanket as an unda, a sworn brother. Yet destiny hardened even friendships. The steppes did not permit equals for long. As Temujin grew, the wounds of abandonment sharpened into ambition. He gathered followers not through promise of wealth, but through fairness and strength, rewarding merit, punishing treachery, demanding loyalty only because he gave it fiercely in return. In the silence of the Mongolian night, with nothing but wind and hunger as witnesses, the future Genghis Khan was forged not by privilege but by pain, by the harsh breath of winter, by the certainty that only those who bend the world survive it. The boy who escaped his captors now rose like a young wolf among the herds, lean, determined, eyes fixed on a destiny the steppe had tried and failed to crush. His path to power had only begun, and already blood, betrayal, and unbroken will marked his footsteps across the sacred grasslands. As Temujin entered manhood, the memory of hunger and humiliation clung to him like frost on the steppe grass. Yet destiny called him back to the place where his father had once sealed his future, the home of the Ungrat tribe, where Berthe, promised to him as a child, waited. She greeted him not as a broken orphan, but as a man tempered by hardship, and their union became more than tradition. It was loyalty, warmth after years of cold nights, and the first anchor in a life shaped by betrayal. But peace in the steppe was a breath between storms. News of Temujin's return spread, stirring old enemies, and the Merkits, seeking revenge for his father's capture of Huelin decades earlier, descended like wolves in the night. They stormed the camp, seized Berthe, and disappeared into the darkness. That night, as fire crackled and the steppe wind carried her cries into silence, Temujin tasted the familiar bitterness of loss. Yet his resolve did not break. He sought out alliances not through bloodline, but through merit and shared purpose. He rode to Togrul, Khan of the Karaites, and once sworn brother to Yesugei, earning support with respect, humility, and a reminder of old loyalties. Then he called upon Jamuka, his childhood Anda, who welcomed him warmly, and together they rode with hundreds into Merkit territory. Their horses swept across the land like thunder, striking fast, relentless, coordinated. They tore through Merkit defenses, reclaimed Berthe, and brought her home with honor. The rescue was more than victory. It announced Temujin's return to the steppe as a leader not by birthright, but by destiny earned in fire and loyalty. But in victory, seeds of rivalry took root. Jamuka saw in Temujin not a companion, but a rising force. Jamuka clung to aristocratic tradition. He believed nobles were born to rule and commoners to serve. Temujin believed loyalty and strength made leaders, not lineage. Their visions could not coexist forever. For a time they shared fires, dreams, and hunts, speaking of a united steppe. But beneath their brotherhood ran a silent river of ambition. Temujin gathered men who had no noble name, yet carried unbroken spirit. Herders, hunters, orphans like him, men who followed him because he shared hardship with them, who trusted him because he rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal without hesitation. His camp grew, filled with warriors who felt seen, respected, and valued, a rarity in steppe politics. Stories spread of a leader who listened to the lowborn, who did not steal wives or slaves, who divided spoils fairly, who stood like a shield for those who stood with him. Such fairness was power. Fairness built armies. Jamuka, threatened, claimed Temujin had broken tradition by raising commoners to the ranks of equals, and in the year 1187, the steppes divided as the brothers of youth became rivals of fate. Jamuka struck first, ambushing Temujin's camp and tearing away supporters with cruelty and fire. But Temujin survived once more, escaping into the grasslands just as he had escaped captors as a boy. Not broken, only sharpened. And the men who followed him now did so not out of debt, but belief. In the quiet nights that followed, as smoke curled from distant burned camps, Temujin's purpose solidified like iron quenched in water.
The steppe would no longer be ruled by pride of birth, but by strength, loyalty, and law. Jamukha rode with noble blood. Temujin rode with destiny. Their clash would not be of armies alone, but of worlds. And the wind across the Mongol plains whispered that the age of chaos was nearing its end, and a ruler forged by suffering was rising to bring order by bow, by sword, and by unbreakable will.
The feud between Temujin and Jamukha spread across the grasslands like wildfire. Some clans watched in silence, others chose sides, and many waited for fate to reveal which man the eternal blue sky favored. Jamukha marched under banners of noble lineage. Temujin traveled light, riding with men who owed him nothing, yet would die for him, because he had shared their hunger, their cold nights, their hope. In these years, Temujin began shaping the core of what would become the greatest army on earth, not through fear, not through ancient tradition, but through loyalty earned. Among his rising comrades stood men who would later be called the Four Hounds of Temujin. Gelme, who once pulled an arrow from Temujin's neck with his teeth after a battle. Jebe, once an enemy archer who shot Temujin in combat and was spared because he admitted it honestly. Subutai, the humble blacksmith's son who would become history's most brilliant general, and Borchu, who first helped Temujin recover stolen horses and never left his side again. These men, and many more like them, came not from noble families, but from the soil, from hardship and hunger, warriors who followed him because he trusted them before they proved themselves, unlike steppe nobles who demanded loyalty first and rewarded later. Temujin promoted men by skill, courage, and loyalty, not ancestry. Such ideas shook centuries of tradition and drew common warriors to him like iron to a magnet. But while loyalty grew, danger shadowed every step. Jamukha struck again, but Temujin outmaneuvered him, refusing to meet him head-on unless fate demanded it. The steppe elders whispered that Temujin was changing the order of the world, and for some, that was reason enough to hate him. One night, while Temujin and his companions rested in a mountain pass, enemies tracked them down. Surrounded and outnumbered, Temujin did not panic. The men of the steppes knew that victory was not always won with numbers, but with timing, movement, and morale. He ordered a sudden charge, horses thundering downhill at dawn, their shouts echoing like the cry of wolves. They scattered the enemy, turning certain defeat into triumph. Victory fed his legend, defeat only hardened him. More families joined his banner, not forced, but convinced. Women, elders, and orphans traveled with his camp, protected rather than enslaved, forming a society in motion. This was not merely a war band. It was a nation being born in the saddle, guided by a leader who understood suffering and dignity. Yet Temujin never forgot the sting of betrayal. When a group of former allies plotted to capture him, hoping to deliver him to Jamukha, Temujin acted with ruthless clarity. He punished the ringleaders, but spared the rest, a lesson written in blood, yet tempered with justice. The clans took notice. He was neither cruel without cause, nor weak in mercy. The reputation of Temujin spread beyond the plains.
Travelers spoke of a rising wolf spirit among the Mongols, who rewarded the loyal and crushed traitors. Mothers whispered his name to children as both promise and warning. In this time, Temujin's vision sharpened. No tribe would rule alone. The steppe would not devour its own forever, and no man would rise by birthright alone. The eternal blue sky favored the worthy, and Temujin believed worth was proven in hardship, loyalty, and discipline. The old world was cracking, and through its fractures a new force rose, a leader with the heart of a shepherd for his people and the teeth of a wolf for his enemies. The drums of unification beat steadily, and as winter gave way to spring, Temujin prepared to confront the fate he could no longer outrun, the final test against Jamukha, not just for leadership of the tribes, but for the future of Mongolia itself.
The years of rivalry could not hold forever. The steppes were too wide for two rising suns, and the warriors of Mongolia could not be divided when destiny demanded one ruler. Temujin and Jamukha, once boys sharing a blanket in childhood, now stood as men commanding nations of riders. Jamukha wrapped himself in ancient nobility, claiming the right to rule by aristocratic blood. Temujin rode under a new creed, that loyalty and merit forged leaders, not ancestry. This clash was deeper than personal ambition. It was the old world fighting the new, tradition against transformation, privilege against earned authority. The Kurultai cants murmured, "Two eagles circling the same peak cannot share the sky." Jamukha attacked first, capturing young warriors who had defected to Temujin. In an act meant to terrify, he boiled them alive in a cauldron. The steppe did not forget cruelty, and this horror turned stomachs and hearts against him. Where Temujin punished traitors with precision, Jamukha punished followers in rage. The difference was stark. One leader ruled by fairness and iron discipline, the other by fear and wounded pride. As tribes reconsidered loyalty, Temujin summoned his own council. No grand speeches, no promises to nobles. He spoke of unity, justice, and a world where no clan abandoned widows and children to hunger, where faiths were respected, where skill mattered more than birth. His words spread like fire through dry grass, igniting hope where there had only been survival. Men did not join him, they flocked to him. The armies met in the year 1204, in the valleys near Nokku Hills. Jamukha's banners fluttered with ancient lineage, Temujin's with hard-earned loyalty. The ground trembled as tens of thousands of hooves struck earth. Temujin unleashed a tactic that stunned noble commanders. Instead of rigid cavalry formations, he moved fluidly, waves of horse archers striking fast from flanks, feigning retreats, pulling enemies into traps, then charging in tight spears of precision. Jamukha's army fought bravely, but was bound by tradition, each noble standard refusing to yield, each unit proud but isolated. Temujin's forces moved as one, a single will across thousands. Arrows fell like rain, drums beat like thunder, and the cry of the Mongol war horn echoed through the mountains. When the dust settled, Temujin stood victorious. Jamuka fled, a leader of ghosts and fading loyalties. In the months that followed, the steppe shifted like a shaken sky. Darkhan, exempt warriors, swore to Temujin. Shaman spirits whispered that he was chosen by Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Mothers and elders blessed his path. But fate gave him one final test. Jamuka was betrayed by followers seeking favor and delivered bound before Temujin. Silence fell. Temujin looked at the man who had once shared his childhood food, who had once dreamed beside him beneath the same stars. Jamuka did not beg. He asked only for a noble death without spilled blood. Temujin honored him. There was no rage, no triumph, only the quiet closing of a chapter written in loyalty and rivalry. When it was done, Temujin forgave the betrayers, for he despised treachery more than any enemy. Those who betray once will betray again, he warned, and he let them go with nothing but their shame. The steppe understood then that he was not only a conqueror, but a ruler of fierce principle. With Jamuka gone, tribes that once roamed as wolves apart now gathered like a single storm. The mountains, rivers, and plains of Mongolia trembled, for a leader had risen who could command both fear and devotion. The old world lay broken in dust. A new order stood ready to rise, forged in hardship, sworn by loyalty, and blessed by the eternal blue sky. Soon the clans would assemble in a great council, and the name Temujin would give way to a title the world would learn to fear and respect: Genghis Khan. When the drums of coronation faded and the tribes bowed before him, the title Genghis Khan did not feel like a crown placed upon his head, but a weight carved into his bones. He stood not as the abandoned boy, nor the rising warlord, but as ruler of a united steppe, the first in living memory strong enough to bind clans that once preferred blood feuds over loyalty. Before him stretched riders hardened by hunger and war, faces shaped by wind and loss, men who followed because he had earned every command, and now they waited for the future he promised. Genghis did not celebrate. He reorganized the world. He broke the ancient power of nobles, stripping clan chiefs of unchecked authority and forming a new order where loyalty to the Khan came before birth or tribe. He created his Arban, Zun, Mingan, and Tumen, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, men grouped not by kinship but by trust and discipline. An army engineered not by tradition, but by purpose. He elevated those who bled beside him, not those born to silk and arrogance. And for the first time on the steppe, a shepherd could rise as high as a prince if he proved worthy. These decisions shook the old world. Proud aristocrats watched their power dissolve, while ordinary warriors felt destiny open before them like a horizon without end. Then came the yasa, the law of the Khan, simple, harsh, and unbreakable. No theft, no betrayal, no lies, no refuge for cowardice. Every soldier shared loot fairly. Every child enjoyed protection regardless of status. Every religion practiced freely as long as loyalty to the Khan stood first. Justice replaced chaos. Order replaced tribal games, and those who once hid behind lineage now trembled as merit became king. Across the campfires, warriors sharpened arrows and whispered of the world beyond the steppes. The mighty Jin Empire to the south, rich and arrogant behind its walls. The Khwarezm lands further west, buzzing with trade. And ancient cities that believed nomads were nothing but wind and dust. Genghis listened, and the fire in his eyes grew colder, clearer, not burning with rage, but with purpose. He knew unity was only the beginning. Power unused invited challenge, and an empire that stood still soon fell. The eternal blue sky had lifted him. Now he would test whether heaven favored him only as ruler of the grasslands or as conqueror of worlds. As the night wind swept across the camp and horses snorted in the dark, Genghis Khan looked over the men who followed him not because they feared him, but because they believed in him. The boy who once ate roots to survive now commanded a nation of riders ready to carve history with hooves and steel. And though peace hung lightly in the air like morning mist, every warrior felt what came next. The steppe had united under one banner, and when a storm finds strength, it does not rest, it moves.
Power had been claimed, laws set, and the tribes bound under one will. But a united steppe was not a throne, it was only a saddle. And Genghis Khan knew that a ruler who stayed still soon became prey. To prove the strength he forged, to harden men who had known only tribal raiding, he looked west toward the Tangut kingdom of Western Shah, a land of desert fortresses, grain-filled cities, and caravan routes tied to the Silk Road. They believed walls and wealth made them safe from horsemen born from wind and hunger. But Genghis saw what others missed. Before striking the Jin Empire, he needed a campaign to train his new army, to test loyalty, discipline, supply, and command on foreign soil. He rode not as a raider, but as a sovereign expecting tribute, sending envoys to demand respect and alliance. The Tangut refused, confident their stone cities and crossbow lines would crush nomads like dust beneath wheels. Genghis answered with motion. Tens of thousands riding in perfectly ordered tumans, scouts stretching outward like hawks over the desert, supply animals trailing behind, not chaos, but calculation. For the first time, Mongol warriors crossed borders as an organized empire, not scattered clans. They moved with silence and precision, shock and speed, encircling towns before defenders even understood the threat. Resistance was fierce. Siege towers met arrow storms, desert heat scorched throats, and Tangut catapults hurled stones against Mongol lines, yet the steppe spirit did not break. Warriors who once followed tribal whim now obeyed without hesitation, rotating horses, fighting in squads, advancing and withdrawing like a living machine. They learned siegecraft, learned patience, learned that walls could bleed just like men if struck at the right joints. And in the nights between clashes, as campfires flickered against endless dunes, Genghis reminded them that conquest was not destruction alone. It was order, discipline, and future. He accepted surrender where it served him, spared those who submitted, crushed only those who believed pride outweighed reality. The Tangut king, shaken by relentless pressure, envoys lost and cities trembling, finally bent, not to a raider, but to an emperor rising. Tribute was offered, submission pledged, and the name of Genghis Khan carried into foreign courts not as rumor, but as warning. The campaign ended not in annihilation, but in recognition, proof that the Mongol nation was no temporary storm, but a force shaped by law,
vision, and iron will. Returning to the steppe, men rode harder, sat straighter, spoke the Khan's name with a certainty that bordered on destiny. They had crossed into another world and returned victorious. The tribes had become an army. The army had become a force, and the force now looked toward richer lands, higher walls, and greater enemies. The test was passed. The world had noticed. And Genghis Khan, gazing south, where the golden empire of the Jin shimmered beyond mountains and city gates, understood the truth of empires. Once a predator tastes victory, hunger only grows.
Victory over Western Shah echoed across desert and grass, but triumph carries whispers, and some whispers insult. To the south, the Jin Empire, rich, ancient, armored in silk, paper money, and bureaucrats, dismissed the rising steppe power as little more than troublesome riders who got lucky in sand and wind. They sneered, calling Genghis Khan a barbarian chief, a wild dog biting at the edge of the Middle Kingdom. They forgot something fatal. Wild dogs do not organize nations, train armies, and win sieges in foreign lands. The insult did not ignite reckless rage. It created calculation. Genghis had long studied the Jin, an empire whose ancestors once bent tribes to their will, who taxed the steppe, who once forced Temujin's father's generation to bow. Now the balance had shifted. Before riding south, he secured his rear, strengthening alliances, integrating conquered tribes, promoting generals on merit, not blood. Subutai sharpened campaigns like blades, Jebi's eyes read terrain like scripture, and the discipline forged in desert heat now stood ready to break cities of stone. Genghis sent envoys, formal, respectful, a final chance for diplomacy. They returned dead and humiliated, one beheaded, the others with hair torn and faces slashed, the unforgivable crime in steppe law. In the silence after hearing this, Genghis did not shout. Fury in him never exploded outward, it condensed inward like iron cooling in fire. He called his generals, laid out a campaign not of simple invasion, but systematic dismantling. Mongol riders flowed south like black wind across mountain passes and river plains, not reckless, but in coordinated thrusts. Feigned retreats to stretch armies thin, ambushes on supply columns, engineers building siege machines with knowledge learned and expanded from Shah and beyond. Cities that trusted walls found themselves cut off, starved, their gates shattered by trebuchets acquired from captured Chinese engineers who now served because Genghis rewarded skill over origin. Panic spread among Jin commanders unused to an enemy who moved faster than messages could travel. Villages surrendered, some to survive, others to earn a place in the new world forming beneath hooves. Those who resisted faced the brutal clarity of steppe justice, mercy for obedience, ruin for defiance. Rivers choked with broken armor, smoke rose where arrogance once stood, and whispers turned to pleas across imperial halls. Yet Genghis remained controlled. He targeted infrastructure, supply, morale, not mindless burning. He left fields intact when surrender came early, executed only the stubborn elite who sought to use peasants as shields. He tore apart the Jin not as a raider, but as a ruler removing a dying arrogant structure to make space for a new order. When word reached the steppes of victories and collapsing defenses, mothers who once feared starvation now believed their sons fought not for survival, but for transformation.
The man who once wandered starving now held a continent trembling at the edge of his reins. Yet he did not celebrate. He studied maps, planned next moves, and whispered to the eternal sky with the same quiet vow. Power was not destination, but duty. The Mongols no longer asked for respect. They were taking a world that once mocked them, and every gate that fell fed a growing truth. Genghis Khan was no barbarian king. He was a force history had underestimated, and now history would pay the price for laughing.
The Jin Empire staggered. But an empire does not die in quiet fields. It dies at its heart, and the heart of Jin beat behind the massive walls of Zhongdu, the golden capital, future Beijing, a city swollen with fear and pride, nobles arguing behind lacquered doors while starving peasants clung to rumors of salvation. Genghis Khan advanced not in blind charge, but in steady, tightening rings, each circle a noose pulling closer, cutting trade, cutting hope, suffocating confidence. His scouts mapped rivers, bridges, grain stores, escape roads. Siege engineers, Persian craftsmen captured in earlier raids, Chinese experts turned by reward and status, constructed catapults, mangonels, and fire throwers capable of hurling burning pitch over walls once believed untouchable. The defenders launched rockets and arrows, drums thundered from watchtowers, imperial banners snapped in wind like stubborn pride refusing to bow. Genghis watched in silence, marking weaknesses, rotating generals, testing lines not to waste men but to study. Mongol soldiers who once only raided now fought with discipline that unsettled every defender. Moving in units, shielding engineers, forming human walls so siege towers could creep forward like wooden beasts. Supplies flowed behind the Mongol lines with precision. Herds moved in rotating waves to feed warriors. Runners moved messages faster than any imperial courier. Courtesans and merchants fled the city carrying whispers of panic. Weeks stretched into months. Hunger clawed Zhongdu harder than arrows. Citizens gnawed bark, soldiers cracked bone for marrow, and plague stalked alleys. Still the gates held until betrayal cracked them from within. Desperate ministers argued surrender, while proud generals insisted death over humiliation. Chaos opened a seam. Mongols surged in, street by street, tower by tower, no frenzy, only method. Screams rose, defenders broke, and the mighty capital that once demanded tribute from the steppe fell to a banner born in cold wind and misery. Genghis did not spare the city. This fall was not punishment, but message. Empires that insult emissaries and laugh at hunger earn ruin. Fire rose, palaces crumbled, nobles fled, and the eternal sky stood witness as Zhongdu collapsed under hooves and hate earned over generations. Yet, amid flame and blood, Genghis preserved craftsmen, scholars, metalworkers, engineers, because conquest was not about ash, it was about future. The Khan rode through shattered gates, not with triumph in his eyes, but calculation. This victory was vast, but the world was larger still. He looked west toward ancient kingdoms, south toward song riches, farther still toward lands no Mongol had set hoof upon. The golden capital lay broken behind him, but his gaze remained on horizons no empire dreamed a stepchild could reach. The boy who once starved in winter grass had taken the throne of giants, and still he did not stop.
The world was wide, and hunger, once a curse, was now destiny.
Zhengdu had fallen, Jin authority shattered, but conquest was a road with no resting place, and Genghis Khan did not mistake victory for completion. The empire he forged could not breathe inside one battlefield. Power demanded expansion, security demanded distance, and ambition demanded the world. Yet, before new horizons could open, a spark in the west threatened everything. The Khwarezmian Empire, rich Silk Road cities, vast armies, scholars, merchants, desert caravans glittering with trade between China and the Islamic world, stood proud and powerful. Genghis Khan did not first arrive with sword, but with respect. He sent a caravan of merchants to establish peaceful trade, to open routes and exchange riches, to give a chance for coexistence between two rising worlds. Instead of welcome, arrogance answered. The governor of Otrar seized the caravan, accusing them of being spies, slaughtering them and stealing their goods. Genghis demanded justice. Hand over the guilty governor. The Khwarezmian Shah, Muhammad II, not understanding the scale of the force he mocked, executed one Mongol envoy and humiliated the others, cutting beards, dishonoring sacred diplomatic protection. In the steppe, killing an envoy was not insult, it was declaration of war, sanctioned by heaven itself. There was no roar, no rage in Genghis Khan's face, only the stillness of a storm preparing to fall. He gathered generals, each forged by victories and discipline: Subutai the wolf, Jebi the arrow, Tolui the iron sun. They traced plans in dust and air, not for invasion, but for annihilation. Genghis moved not like a raider, but like fate incarnate. Multiple armies sweeping through mountains, deserts, and fertile plains, feinting retreats, cutting communication, shattering Khwarezmian formations before they could unite. Cities fell in shock and fire, some choosing surrender and survival, others choosing pride and extinction. Walls that once rose against nomads now became traps for defenders who could not outmaneuver riders born to horizon winds. Subutai crossed impossible ranges. Jebe cut down elite forces like reeds. Tolui turned Samarkand to a monument of terror and obedience. Genghis Khan punished betrayal, but he rewarded loyalty even in enemies. Artisans, scholars, and engineers were spared, moved, elevated under Mongol rule. What he crushed was arrogance, deceit, and rulers who sacrificed people for personal ego. Shah Muhammad fled city to city, his confidence dissolving into panic until he died in exile, hunted and broken by the shadow of the Khan he provoked. The Mongols pursued him not for vengeance alone, but to send a message to every throne: those who betray Mongol peace face Mongol judgment. Caravan routes were secured, steppe and sown lands connected under one will, and wealth flowed like rivers cut open after centuries of stone. Yet this conquest was not triumph alone. Brutality cloaked regions, cities burned, and survivors whispered the Khan's name in terror and awe. But to the Mongols, this was not cruelty. It was order, forged in a world where weakness invited invasion and treachery demanded reckoning. As desert winds lifted banners over ruined palaces and trade routes once again filled with movement,
Genghis Khan stood on the peak of a world that once mocked him. He had broken a great empire not for glory, but to carve a road for generations and to make certain no ruler ever dared betray Mongol envoys again. The stepchild who once hunted food now commanded continents, his reach stretching farther than any king of his time. And yet, even as victory roared from horizon to horizon, he did not slow, for history does not remember the ruler who stops, only the one who rewrites the earth.
Khwarezm lay broken, its Shah dead in exile, and its cities silent beneath Mongol banners. Yet Genghis Khan did not return home to celebration. Victory was never destination, only passage, and a final flame still burned in the ruins. Jalal ad-Din, the fallen Shah's son, a prince who refused to kneel. Where his father fled in panic, Jalal ad-Din fought with steel and fury, gathering survivors, rallying soldiers who would rather die than dishonor their lineage, striking Mongol scouts, ambushing patrols, proving himself not a remnant, but a rising threat. Genghis Khan watched with interest, not rage, for he respected strength wherever it existed. In the young prince, he saw something rare: courage, skill, and determination, the fire of a leader who might have ruled a continent had fate placed him on different ground. But admiration does not soften strategy. Potential rivals must be crushed before they grow roots. Mongol detachments swarm the land like winter across grass, clearing pockets of resistance, enforcing surrender, and executing only those who chose defiance over submission, turning conquered lands into structured order under Mongol law and administration. Yet Jalal ad-Din slipped through every tightening ring until fate drew both armies to the banks of the Indus. The prince cornered, Mongol forces closing, water roaring behind him. He fought like a lion surrounded by wolves, cutting through lines, refusing surrender, even as his men fell one by one. When escape seemed impossible, he made a choice that would echo for centuries. He spurred his horse off the cliff, plunging into the river below rather than yield. Genghis Khan watched from a ridge and, in a moment rare in conquest, spoke not as conqueror but as father and warrior. A father should have a son like this. He forbade archers to shoot, granting an enemy honor, because only great men recognize greatness. Jalal ad-Din vanished into foreign lands, a living legend, while the Mongols remained, reorganizing the Silk Road under strict command, appointing governors, protecting trade, establishing the Yam relay system, so messages flew across the empire faster than any kingdom could imagine, and enforcing a new order where loyalty meant safety and betrayal meant extinction. Cities once proud now paid tribute. Scholars and artisans lived under Mongol protection, and soldiers who once raided now served an empire with law, rank, and discipline. Yet while the world outside bent under Genghis Khan's will, inside his own camp subtle cracks formed. His sons, raised in victory and privilege, began to argue and compete, seeds of pride and rivalry pushing beneath the surface like roots searching for weakness. The Khan saw it, but pushed forward, knowing that empires fall not from foreign swords first, but from division at their core. Still, he rode on, relentless, the earth trembling beneath his hooves, confident in the truth that shaped his life. Motion is survival. Conquest is stability, and only those who control their bloodline can hope to rule the world they carve.
With Khorazm subdued and the western horizon secured by fear and respect, Genghis Khan did not rest or freeze his empire in triumph. He turned inward, not to retreat, but to shape what he had taken. Because conquest wins land, but administration preserves it. He rode through his territories not as a raider, but as a ruler, inspecting governors, questioning commanders, rewarding those who enforced law and punishing those who abused power, for he believed that empire without justice was carcass waiting for vultures. The Yam courier network expanded like veins across Asia. Relay stations, fresh horses, sealed messages flying faster than any kingdom's army could march, a system so efficient even the smallest rumor reached the Khan before it turned into threat. Trade routes that once belonged to fractured states now thrived under one banner. Merchants crossed deserts and mountains under Mongol protection, taxed fairly, guarded by patrols, knowing that theft on the roads meant death regardless of who committed it, nomad or noble. Caravan bells echoed across plains, bringing silk, spices, gems, steel, knowledge, doctors, engineers, astronomers, ideas carried on wagon wheels and saddlebags. Mongol law, the yasa, continued to evolve, forbidding noble privilege in command and forcing religious tolerance, banning theft of livestock from loyal subjects, ordering census counts for organized taxing, and establishing strict rules of military obedience. Genghis welcomed all faiths. Muslims prayed, Buddhists chanted, Christians worshipped, shamans spoke to sky, because belief did not threaten him, only disunity did, and unity could not be forced through dogma, but through fairness. Scholars translated texts, artisans forged armor and tools, bridges rose across rivers, granaries filled, while generals returned with reports instead of loot, learning governance as sharply as war. But even as empire hardened into structure, Genghis Khan felt time like wind across a steppe ridge, always moving, never friendly. His sons trained in command, yet their spirits clashed like steel hidden beneath silk. Jochi, the eldest, quiet and proud, carried questions of birth whispered by rivals. Chagatai bristled with temper and tradition. Ogedei bore calm and diplomacy. Tolyu burned with devotion and fire. The Khan saw leadership in each, but unity in none, a truth he tucked away like a blade he hoped never to draw. His daughters, married to secure alliances, ruled frontier regions with iron discipline, proving women of the steppe were not ornaments, but commanders of diplomacy and strategy. In council tents beneath eternal blue sky, the Khan planned further conquests. Jin remnants still breathed. Western Xia watched nervously, and lands even farther west whispered of kingdoms yet untouched. But for now he built, he organized, he listened to grievances from shepherd and noble alike, because the empire he forged could not depend solely on fear. It required function, loyalty, and purpose. At night, when camps lay quiet and fires burned low, he remembered his mother's hunger, his father's poisoning, his childhood abandonment, and he willed that no loyal family under his banner should face such despair again. He was conqueror, yes, but he believed himself protector, protector of order, protector of discipline, protector of a future he had carved with arrows and oath. And so he worked not to freeze time, but to shape it, knowing mountains erode and empires collapse when leaders stop watching their own foundations. For Genghis Khan understood one truth deeper than any king before him. The world is conquered by sword, but it is ruled by system. And the man who forgets that loses his throne long before enemies take it.
Under a sky that had once witnessed his childhood hunger and later his imperial thunder, Genghis Khan turned from conquest to legacy, shaping laws, assigning governors, strengthening the Yam courier lines, and ensuring that justice moved faster than rebellion. The empire breathed in order. Caravans rolled safely from the Yellow River to the Caspian shores. Religions worshipped without fear. Generals learned to rule. Census counts measured life, not loot. And even the humblest shepherd could petition the Khan without trembling before a noble. Yet while his empire matured, time pressed against his armor. His sons trained under his eye. Jochi distant and proud, Chagatai fierce and unyielding, Ogedei wise in counsel, Tolui loyal like fire itself. And though he saw greatness in each, he also saw the storm of ambition brewing beneath brotherhood. He traveled among his people, spoke to commanders, rewrote rules, and reminded all that empire was not a trophy, but a living creature fed by discipline, unity, and vision. But destiny never bargains. In 1226, when the Tangut of western Shia defied tribute and memory, he rode once more, not as aging ruler, but as the same relentless horseman who once fought starvation with fists and iron will. Cities burned, banners fell, and the Tangut kingdom collapsed under Mongol siege. Yet victory carried a shadow. During the campaign, he was injured, whether by fall, fever, or battlefield wound, history guards like a secret. And the conqueror who had outpaced death since childhood felt its hoofbeats at last. Still he commanded, still he planned, still he spoke of expansion and unity, refusing weakness even as strength slipped from bone and breath. Then, in August 1227, near the lands of western Xia, in what is now Gansu, China, the eternal blue sky called his son home. He ordered loyalty to Ogedei, warned against division, and reminded his commanders that an empire does not die from enemy steel, but from fractured hearts. His body was borne away under secrecy toward Mongolia, hidden from the world, buried where only earth and ancestors know, perhaps by the Onan River, where Temujin once drank as a forgotten boy. And so the wolf-born child who became master of nations passed undefeated, leaving behind not just empire, but system, not just terror, but trade, not just conquest, but order. His reign ended, but his shadow stretched on, across steppes, kingdoms, continents, and centuries, where even his enemies would whisper truth. Before him, the world was wide. After him, it was ruled.
With the Khan gone, the steppe did not fall silent. Hooves still thundered across the plains, banners still snapped in the wind, and every warrior still gripped bow and saddle. Yet a weight settled like twilight over the empire. The wolf who led them from hunger to dominion had returned to the sky, and now the world waited, curious and fearful, to see whether his sons would guard the flame or watch it die and quarrel. Genghis Khan's final command named Ogedei as his successor, not because he was the fiercest nor the firstborn, but because he held what empires outlive swords for: calm judgment, patience, the ability to listen and bend without breaking, a mind steady as a river stone while others burned like brush fire. Still, bloodlines are storms, not rivers. Chagatai, proud and rigid, had long challenged Ogedei, while Tolui, youngest and closest to the father's spirit, could have seized the throne by strength alone had ambition ruled him. But loyalty to their father outweighed rivalry, and the oath to preserve the empire tightened around them like iron.
At the Kurultai of 1229, under the endless sky their father worshipped, chiefs, generals, princes, and trusted families gathered. The wind carried prayers, warriors beat shields in thunderous oath, and Ogedei rose as the second great Khan, while Chagatai accepted governance of his own Ulus, and Toluyi stood as guardian of the homeland, a compromise forged not by love, but by duty to a legacy too vast to betray. Under Ogedei, the empire shifted from conquest alone to structure and permanence. Census takers rode from yurt to walled city. Taxes were standardized. The Yam courier system grew like veins of empire. Its stations stocked with horses and food to carry messages faster than any kingdom's army could march. Markets flourished from Korea to Persia. Caravans moved under Mongol protection. Craftsmen and scholars from conquered lands were summoned to build and advise. On the Orkhon River plain, where once only grass and horse tracks lay, Karakoram began to rise. Not a symbolic capital, but a beating administrative heart, where artisans shaped coins, envoys from distant kings bowed in marble halls, and Persian scribes sat beside Chinese engineers under the watch of Mongol guards. Yet the pause was only breath, not rest. The Jin dynasty in northern China still stood, wounded but defiant. Its walls high, its crossbows sharp, its pride unwilling to accept steppe supremacy. Genghis had begun that war. Ogedei would finish it. Siege engineers hammered wood and iron. Generals sharpened strategy. Tumans drilled for river crossings in city assaults, and the sons of the steppe prepared once more to strike the settled world that had once looked down on them as mere riders of dust and hunger. Envoys from Europe arrived, trembling. Merchants whispered of Mongol justice and wrath in the same breath. And across Asia, people learned the new truth. Genghis Khan had died without defeat, and his empire was not shrinking into memory. It was organizing, expanding, gathering strength like a bow drawn slow and taut before release. The eternal blue sky had taken its greatest warrior, but his dream did not fade. It marched onward in the hands of sons and generals who understood his law, his will, and his warning. An empire does not fall by enemy blade, but by weakness within. And so the world watched, uneasy, as the Mongols tightened saddles once more, not as scattered tribes, but as a machine forged by one man, and now guided by his chosen heir, riding not to survive, but to rule.
Under Ogedei's command, the empire did not merely stir, it lunged, reclaiming the unfinished will of Genghis Khan, the destruction of the Jin dynasty. The Mongols moved like storm fronts across northern China, siege towers rolling, engineers from conquered lands shaping catapults and fire machines, while cavalry swept the plains to cut supplies and crush reinforcements. The Jin clung to walls and cities, believing stone could outlast horsemen, yet stone alone cannot withstand hunger. Mongol strategy was patient and merciless. River crossings, canal blockades, winter marches, each tactic pressed deeper, until, in 1234, after years of siege and allied pressure from the southern Song, the Jin capital Kaifeng fell, their dynasty erased as Genghis Khan had sworn it would be. With northern China subdued, tribute pouring from cities once thought unreachable, Ogedei looked west and south at maps swollen with new ambitions. Roads strengthened, governors learned discipline, and the empire breathed like a giant that had only begun to stretch its limbs. Yet triumph carried sorrow. Toluyi, the Khan's most loyal son, drank a sacrificial cup of cleansing meant to lift misfortune from the court and died soon after, whether by poison or pure devotion, leaving Ogedei burdened with grief and shadowed by the loss of the brother who had balanced the court's fiercest hearts. Power flowed outward still. Armies under Subutai rode toward distant kingdoms.
Scouts reached mountains never before marked by Mongol hooves, and the capital of Karakorum echoed with foreign voices, merchants from Persia, emissaries from Rus, monks from Europe, astonished by the order found under a banner once feared as barbaric. But duty was not only conquest. Administration sharpened, laws enforced, and the great Khan, though a drinker and a man of indulgence, wielded authority with surprising steadiness, rewarding merit over blood, recalling the lesson Genghis carved into every command: empire survives only through discipline. Meanwhile, word spread across oceans and deserts, reports that the Mongols did not vanish after Genghis. They grew stronger, more organized, their reach stretching from Manchurian forests to Persian deserts. Kings in distant lands fortified walls, prayed harder, and watched the horizon as if the sky itself marched toward them. In the steppe, soldiers sharpened bows, horses grazed for strength, commanders watched the wind and waited. The world believed Genghis Khan was the storm. Now it began to understand he had merely been the opening thunder.
From the fall of Jin, the Mongol gaze turned farther than China's river plains, toward horizons whispered of in merchants' tongues, lands of armored knights, stone churches, cold forests, and kingdoms that believed themselves safe behind distance and myth. Ogedei commanded expansion west, entrusting the task to Subutai, the greatest strategist of the age, a man who had learned under Genghis himself and now rode with maps etched in memory and patience forged in siege camps. The target was not one kingdom, but an entire front of civilizations, the Khwarezmian remnants, the Caucasus tribes, the Kievan princes, the Volga Bulgars, and beyond them, Europe's armored elite who worshipped steel as Mongols worshipped the horse. The first blows fell swift and mathematical. Scouts measured rivers, counted hills, mapped winter roads. Spies seeded rumors. Tribes were offered alliance or annihilation. Mongols crossed the Caucasus like wolves in snow, breaking Georgian armies, scattering mountain tribes, turning victories into information, prisoners into guides. Across the Volga, they shattered Volga Bulgaria, then pressed into the Rus principalities, finding a land brave but fractured, cities proud but divided, princes more concerned with quarrels than the thunder approaching. In 1237, winter cloaked the land and the Mongols moved, for winter was not hardship but advantage. Frozen rivers became highways, plains became firm ground, and Russian horses, heavy and slow, froze while steppe ponies thrived. Ryazan burned first, then Vladimir, then Moscow. Each city encircled, walls breached, defenders cut down or enslaved. Those who surrendered early survived. Those who boasted died with their pride beneath collapsing towers. Kiev, jewel of the Rus, fell in 1240, its churches shattered, its nobles slain or fleeing, and the survivors understood the truth. Europe's stone and steel had met something faster, smarter, and mercilessly coordinated. Yet conquest was not madness, but method. After every city fell, order followed, tributes set, governors appointed, trade routes protected, messages flown back to Karakorum. Victory was never just destruction, it was integration, extraction, preparation for the next strike. From the smoking remains of Rus, the Mongol tide rolled west, scouts reaching Hungary and Poland, whispering to terrified kings of a force that moved faster than rumor. Europe prayed, argued, forged alliances too late,
Knights polished armor thinking valor alone could stop an empire engineered for movement and intelligence. Subutai listened, watched, planned, waiting for the moment to crush kingdoms as if breaking brittle shields beneath iron hooves. And far in the steppe, Ogedei opened wine, confident his armies stretched like wind across continents, believing no frontier could halt the legacy of Genghis Khan. The world thought the storm had already passed. Only now did it realize the storm was still building.
Europe braced behind church bells and iron faith, but faith does not slow hooves. In 1241, Subutai unleashed the final stroke of his Western plan, a synchronized assault across kingdoms that had never before faced an enemy who mapped their land better than they did. Mongol forces split with mathematical precision. One army struck Poland, annihilating knights at Legnica, while the other surged into Hungary, crushing King Bela IV at the Battle of Mogi, shattering Europe's proud cavalry beneath clouds of arrows, feigned retreats, river traps, and thunder from siege engines carried where Europeans believed wagons could not pass. Villages burned, monasteries fell silent, armored crusaders lay dead beneath arrows shot from riders who moved faster than sermons, and Europe, for the first time in centuries, trembled before a new power. Panic swept through courts, kings fled cities, princes begged the Pope for unity, but unity forged in fear arrives too late. Mongol scouts reached the outskirts of Vienna, and the continent seemed moments from conquest. Yet even as Europe braced for its final dawn, the wind shifted. Riders from the east galloped across rivers and mountains, bearing news that changed history more than any battlefield could. Ogedei Khan was dead in December 1241. According to Mongol law and loyalty, every prince of Genghis's blood had to return for the Kurultai. Empire was built on unity, and no campaign, no victory, no ambition outweighed that command. Subutai, whose strategies had shaken a continent, turned back not in defeat but in discipline, cursing delay, yet obeying the law that kept the empire whole. Europe breathed again, not because it had won, but because destiny paused. Chroniclers called it miracle, kings called it salvation, but the truth was colder. Europe survived not by steel or strategy, but because a Mongol emperor died thousands of miles away. As armies withdrew, the world realized something terrifying. The Mongols had not been stopped, they had chosen to stop. In the steppe, the princes gathered beneath the eternal sky, each burning with ambition. Chagatai's heirs, Ogedei's faction, Tolui's sons, with Batu victorious in the west, and young Mongke and Kublai rising with quiet strength. Every man there knew the empire stood at a crossroads. Would they honor Genghis's unity, or fracture under the weight of their own blood and hunger? The horsemen who shook Europe returned home not defeated, but waiting for the next Khan to point their spears toward whatever horizon would fear them next.
The steppe gathered its princes like storm clouds, and though Europe whispered prayers of deliverance, the true struggle was not in cathedrals or castles, but in felt tents beneath the eternal sky. With Ogedei gone, the question that haunted every warrior and every heir of Genghis Khan rolled across the plains like distant thunder. Who would rule an empire too vast for any single hand? Batu, triumphant from his victories in the west, carried prestige and armies at his back, yet refused to attend the Kurultai at Karakoram, while Ogedei's widow and sons schemed in the capital. The empire paused like a bow drawn but not released. armies waiting, taxes waiting, roads waiting, because succession among the sons of the wolf was not ritual but survival. The regency fell to Toregin Khatun, widow of Ogedei, ambitious and unyielding, maneuvering ministers, rewarding allies, crushing dissent, all to secure the throne for her son Guyuk, while Batu, remembering Guyuk's past insults, vowed never to kneel to him. Unity strained like a saddle strap in winter. At last, in 1246, after years of intrigue, the Kurultai crowned Guyuk as Great Khan, and envoys from every corner, Persians, Chinese, Russians, even the startled Franciscan Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, witnessed not chaos, but an empire of law and command that humbled kings and demanded obedience. Yet Guyuk ruled with suspicion and rivalry, especially toward Batu. And while he demanded tribute and forged alliances, the pulse of the empire faltered and the great machine of conquest slowed. Then, in 1248, he died suddenly on campaign, a reign brief like a rider cut down mid-gallop. Again the steppe waited in tense silence, princes glaring like wolves circling one carcass, Ogedei's line clashing with Chaghatai's, Batu patient as winter, letting time do what blades could not. Across a realm reaching from Korea to Russia, from Persia to China, the danger came not from foreign swords, but from fracture within. And then Batu moved with strategy, not haste, putting forward not himself, but Mongke, eldest son of Toloi, grandson of Genghis Khan, disciplined, feared, proven in war. A man who could stand in the shadow of the great Khan without bowing under it. Thus, as hope and doubt braided across the plains, as the world watched for collapse, the princes prepared for another choice that would decide whether the empire endured or shattered. And beneath the eternal sky, one question still hung like a blade over all. Could the dream of Genghis survive the hunger of his own blood?
Under the eternal sky, the election of Mongke Khan did not unfold as a peaceful ceremony, but as a storm disguised as celebration. Batu summoned the Kurultai far from Karakoram, on his own steppe ground near the Kerlen, where loyalty rode behind him like a river of horsemen. And there, in 1251, Mongke was proclaimed Great Khan, his name rising through the wind like an oath. Yet not all accepted it. The princes of Ogedei's line cried foul, claiming the throne belonged to them, and whispers carried word of plots, daggers hidden in sleeves, alliances forged in shadow. But Mongke did not rule by rumor. He acted with the cold clarity born from generations who survived winter by cutting weakness from the herd. Purges followed, swift, relentless. Those who conspired were seized, exiled, or executed, including many from Ogedei's and Chaghatai's houses, their ambitions extinguished like campfires in snow. This was not cruelty for its own sake, but a reminder that the empire Genghis built could not be governed by divided purpose. The laws of the steppe demanded unity, and Mongke enforced it not by debate, but by action. Once the empire's factions were subdued, he turned to governance with the discipline of a seasoned general. Census of peoples and livestock across the realm, tax reforms through the empire's vast provinces, ministers chosen for skill rather than birth, and great relay stations strengthened to bind the lands from Korea to the Caspian with roads, riders, and imperial wax seals. He understood what many conquerors forget.
An empire can be earned by the sword, but it survives by grain, roads, and law. Yet Mongke did not sheathe the Mongol hunger for conquest. Instead, he unleashed it in two vast directions at once, trusting his brothers as Genghis once trusted his sons. To the west went Hulagu, tasked to break Baghdad's Abbasid Caliphate and extinguish the last embers of power that claimed authority over Islam's world. To the east went Kublai, ordered to crush the Song dynasty in China, a land rich, stubborn, and ancient, whose rivers and fortresses had resisted steppe conquest for centuries. As armies set out, scouts crossed mountains, supply caravans flowed like veins feeding the body of empire, and the world felt the Mongol breath gather again. But even as Mongke expanded his ancestors' legacy, tensions simmered beneath the horizon, rival ambitions among brothers, jealous generals in distant lands, and lands stretched so wide that even the greatest horses could not patrol every frontier. For now, however, the empire stood steadier than it had since Genghis himself breathed, guided by a ruler who saw beyond raids and battles toward structure, order, and vision. And across the continents, kings watched in dread, traders bowed low at checkpoints marked by the great Khan's seal, and the wind carried a truth few dared to speak aloud. The Mongols were not fading. They were rising again under a leader forged by blood, tempered by purpose, and determined to prove that the will of Genghis Khan was not destined for memory, but for dominion.
The drums of empire rolled west once more, not beneath Genghis Khan's own hand, but under his grandson, Hulagu, the quiet storm of the Toluid line, trained in discipline, sharpened by duty, and entrusted with a mission whispered through generations: finish what the great Khan began, and bend the world beyond the horizon. Mongke Khan commanded it. No more rebellious kingdoms in the west, no more defiant caliphs, no more sanctuaries where enemies could gather prayers like weapons. And so Hulagu marched, not with a raiding host, but with one of the largest Mongol armies ever assembled, elite horsemen from the steppe, Chinese siege masters, Persian engineers, Armenian and Georgian allies, and a logistical network that stretched like sinew from Karakoram to the Middle East. Every fortress that once mocked the name of the Khan fell like grass before wind. Alamut, stronghold of the assassins, burned. Mountain citadels crumbled under stone throwers. Secret sects dissolved into dust and legend as Hulagu carved corridors of obedience through Persia. Ahead lay Baghdad, jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, a city that believed knowledge and faith alone could shield it, home to astronomers charting stars, poets shaping memory, doctors writing manuscripts, and the great House of Wisdom, whose libraries held centuries in ink and parchment. But cities built on prestige often forget steel, and Caliph al-Mustasim, bound by arrogance and poor counsel, ignored warnings, spurned diplomacy, and believed divine favor would halt Mongol fury where armies could not. In 1258, the Mongols surrounded Baghdad like a noose tightening around a proud neck. Canals were diverted, trenches dug, siege towers raised like wooden mountains, Chinese catapults hurled stones like falling planets, and battering rams hammered ancient walls until faith turned to panic and poetry to screams.
For days, the Tigris reflected fire and broken hope. Defenders faltered, nobles begged, and the caliph's palace trembled as Mongol banners rose above shattered gates. When the city fell, the Mongols entered not as plunderers, but as instruments of judgment. Commanders captured, scholars dragged from observatories, nobles stripped of titles, the caliph himself bound, rolled in carpet, and crushed beneath hooves so royal blood would not spill the earth. The house of wisdom collapsed, its manuscripts flung into the river until the waters ran black with ink and lore, a library drowned by fate rather than flame, a symbol of how swiftly greatness dies when hubris blinds it. Yet Hulagu spared those who surrendered early, protected craftsmen, physicians, engineers, and ensured trade routes reopened, for Mongol rule destroyed defiance, not utility. Empire needed builders after conquerors. Baghdad's fall echoed across continents, in crusader courts, Cairo's mosques, European monasteries, and Chinese markets, a message carved in terror and awe. The heirs of Genghis Khan were not simply rulers of steppe and sword, but breakers of civilizations, architects of new orders, wielders of fate who reshaped the world with iron discipline and unrelenting will. And as Hulagu established the Ilkhanate in Persia, building palaces atop ashes and ordering roads where libraries once stood, the world understood a truth no kingdom dared deny. The storm born from the Mongol steppe now commanded history itself, and every empire from the Mediterranean to the Pacific would either bow to its shadow or be swallowed by it.
When the dust of Baghdad settled, and Hulagu carved his throne in Persia, another force stirred in the east, one not of fire and ruin alone, but of ambition wrapped in silk and strategy. While the Western world reeled, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis and brother to Mongke, faced a battleground far different from Baghdad's burned walls, the ancient empire of China, cradle of scholars, bureaucracy, agriculture, and a civilization thousands of years old. Unlike many of his kin who preferred the endless sky of the steppe, Kublai studied Chinese classics, learned from Confucian advisors, adopted administrative reforms, and built palaces not from loot but from intention. He did not simply conquer land, he sought to govern it, to blend nomadic ferocity with imperial systems older than the steppe itself. His rise began in the northern forests and plains of Mongol-controlled China, where he was appointed governor, learning the rhythm of harvests, taxation, river control, and the delicate balance between fear and legitimacy. Yet power never moves without friction, and his growing influence drew jealousy in Karakoram. Conservative Mongol nobles whispered that Kublai was becoming too Chinese, forgetting the ways of the ancestors, drinking tea instead of mare's milk, listening to scholars instead of shamans. Kublai answered not with anger, but with results. Famine eased under his policies, canals repaired, granaries filled, and Han nobles, once resentful subjects, began to respect the Mongol prince who understood that empire was not only seized by bowstring, but sustained by law and grain. Still, even brilliance bows to command, and when Mongke launched a campaign against the Song dynasty in southern China, Kublai joined, leading armies through jungles and river valleys where cavalry advantage shrank under humidity and mud. There he learned another truth of conquest. Some kingdoms fall to shock and terror, but others require patience, engineering,
boats instead of horses, bridges instead of raids. Victory came, but at a cost heavy in blood and time, and as reports reached him that Mongke had died in 1259, Kublai faced a pivot only few rulers ever confront: continue a war for empire or return to claim one. He withdrew, not from cowardice, but calculation, for a Mongol who hesitated lost not only throne, but life. Advisors urged speed, rivals sharpened plans, and Arik Boka, his brother and guardian of traditional steppe power, prepared to seize the Kurultai and shape the future in the image of the old world. Kublai, however, saw beyond tents and grazing fields. He saw China, a land where bureaucracy and agriculture could forge stability far more enduring than yurts and seasonal pasture. And so, as he moved north with diplomats, generals, Chinese scholars, Tibetan monks, and loyal steppe warriors at his side, a quiet truth began forming like dawn behind mountains. The next phase of Mongol destiny would not be written in deserts alone, nor in fortress rubble, but in the halls of empire, where paper decrees could command millions and canal networks could feed armies stronger than any cavalry charge. For Kublai Khan understood a lesson few conquerors ever learn. The sword wins submission, but the state wins eternity. And he marched not only to seize the legacy of Genghis, but to transform it into something the world had never seen: a Mongol who would sit on a Chinese throne and rule not as invader, but as emperor of two civilizations.
When Mongke's death rippled across the steppe and the world paused in uncertainty, the empire built by riders and iron laws felt its foundations shift. For the great Khan was gone, and the throne stood open like an unsheathed blade. Kublai, marching north with the discipline of both emperor and horselord, knew that hesitation was death, yet he also knew his brother Arik Burke had already gathered the traditionalists, the pure sons of the steppe, guardians of felt traditions, men who believed the empire should forever breathe nomadic air, and feared cities, scholars, and foreign customs as rot beneath silk. Karakorum, the old capital razed by Genghis himself, rested in Arik Burke's hands, a symbol heavy as steel, where nobles loyal to the past crowned him Great Khan in 1260. But power does not always sit where history once rested. Kublai, surrounded by loyal generals, Song war veterans, and Chinese administrators, held his own Kurultai in Shangdu, claiming the title in a palace of stone and timber, rather than beneath bare sky. Two brothers, two visions, one for a world ruled from saddle and steppe, another for an empire built on tax rolls, granaries, scholars, and the tools of civilization. The air carried tension sharper than a bowstring. Across Central Asia and northern China, loyalties split, messengers raced, and soldiers sharpened lances, knowing they would soon face cousins, brothers in arms, and former camp companions. The Mongol Empire, once united by Genghis's roar, now braced beneath two competing futures. Arik Burke, defender of the ancestral way, gathering support from the Chagatai and many nobles in Karakorum, and Kublai, master of the East, supported by powerful armies, Chinese resources, and pragmatic vision.
War came not as lightning, but as grinding storms, supply lines contested across deserts, strongholds shifting hands, famine gnawing at Karakorum as Kublai cut off grain routes, understanding that victory was not only won by battle, but by starving legitimacy. Arik Berke's warriors fought fiercely, but each month weighed heavier. Steppe loyalty meant honor, yet hunger turns loyalty brittle. Kublai's forces, disciplined and supplied, advanced like tide against drying grass, while his administration secured trade routes, minted currency, and kept markets flowing, proving that power supported by economy and infrastructure stretches farther than power riding alone on faith and memory. For 4 relentless years the brothers pulled at the reins of empire like 2 wolves wrestling over one kill, but by 1264 the truth could no longer be denied. Arik Berke was worn, his supporters fractured, Karakorum withered, and he surrendered to Kublai, not as a defeated general, but as a prince who saw fate bending away from open plains and toward courts and capitals. Kublai judged him not with reckless bloodshed, but solemn authority. Stripping power, yet sparing life, knowing execution would fracture lineage, and martyrdom breeds rebellion. Tradition bowed to strategy, and the empire's heart shifted south forever. The steppe had chosen its future, not because one brother lacked courage, but because the world itself was changing. Grain fed more warriors than herds could, rivers moved more goods than caravans alone, and empire had grown beyond the saddle's reach. With Arik Berke's submission, the age of nomads ruling from an open plain ended, replaced by an era where Mongol destiny would be written in silk-draped halls and marble throne rooms. Yet in the wind rolling over the steppes, the spirits of the ancestors stirred uneasily, for though unity was restored, the Mongol Empire had crossed a point from which there was no return, the day it chose crown over camp, palace over pasture, and forever exchanged some of its wild sky for walls and maps inked with civilization's steady, consuming ambition.
With Arik Boka subdued and the ancient steppe order bowed beneath a new vision, Kublai stood not merely as great Khan of the Mongols, but as a ruler poised to reshape the world. Yet his throne was not secured by surrender alone. Legitimacy demanded more than lineage, and the Middle Kingdom watched him with wary eyes, judging whether this grandson of the steppe would rule like a conqueror or reign like a son of heaven. He moved his capital from Karakorum to Khanbalik, the city that would become Beijing, not in betrayal of tradition, but in recognition that empire now flowed through rivers, harvests, scholars, and silk roads, not herds alone. In 1271, he declared the Yuan dynasty, adopting Chinese imperial rights, mandating Confucian examination systems, appointing administrators for many lands, and signaling to every court in Asia that Mongol rule no longer drifted with camp winds, but sat upon stone foundations as enduring as dynasties before it. Yet transformation came with strain. Conservative Mongols whispered that horses were being traded for scrolls, and Chinese elites bristled at foreign rule, even when offered high rank. But Kublai balanced tradition and innovation, allowing steppe nobles privilege while luring Confucian scholars with patronage, Buddhist monks with temples, Muslim administrators with authority, and merchants with protection and passports under the Grand Pax Mongolica. Caravans crossed from Persia to China uninterrupted. Marco Polo arrived and beheld a court of glittering wealth and controlled power.
Printing presses multiplied texts, postal stations stretched across provinces like arteries, and peasants found grain relief in famine and taxes measured rather than seized by whim. Still, not all bowed willingly. Pockets of resistance smoldered, especially in the south, where the Song dynasty clung to survival across rivers, mountains, and fortresses, confident that boats and scholars could resist horsemen and iron. While Kublai governed, his generals fought, building fleets where once only yurts stood, forging riverine war engines, training cavalry to fight alongside sailors, adapting as Genghis once commanded. To master an enemy, one must first master his world. Year after year the Mongols pressed forward, inching through swamps and rice fields, while Song loyalists died upon ramparts, shouting poetry and patriotism. Then, in 1279, at the naval battle of Yamen, the last Song forces fell, their young emperor drowned at sea, carried in loyal arms into legend, and China, ancient, vast, proud, passed wholly beneath Mongol rule for the first and only time in history. Kublai stood supreme, emperor of the Yuan, Khan of Khans, ruler of the largest unified land empire Earth had ever seen. But with triumph came the silent weight of consequence. Running a settled empire demanded patience alien to riders born to conquer. And the further Mongols moved from the saddle, the more their fate intertwined with bureaucrats, harvest cycles, currency systems, and court intrigue. He feasted beside scholars instead of warriors, issued edicts more than war cries, and built canals instead of siege towers. Yet, beneath silk robes and jade seals, his heart still remembered wind on the steppe, the taste of fermented mare's milk, the thunder of hooves rolling like sky-born drums. In those quiet moments, he realized the paradox he had inherited. To preserve the world won by fire, one must drown the fire. And to rule land so vast, one must bind it with laws instead of fear alone. Under his reign, the Mongol dream reached its highest point. Commerce flowed, cultures mixed, envoys traveled freely, maps widened, knowledge crossed borders once locked by empire and suspicion. But with every passing year, as palace etiquette replaced saddle instinct and stone walls replaced canvas tents, the memory of the wild steppe softened in the hearts of future heirs. Kublai had secured the throne and built a dynasty, but in doing so he had also begun the slow transformation that every nomadic empire must face. When the conqueror becomes the empire becomes something new, stronger in stone, yet weaker in spirit, glorious in civilization, yet vulnerable to the decay that settles not from outside enemies, but from comfort, division, and the inevitable distance between the founder's hunger and the successor's inheritance. The world bowed to Kublai, yet fate watched, for as high as a dynasty rises, it forever casts a shadow waiting to fall.
With the Yuan throne secured and the vast empire humming under a new rhythm, Kublai shifted from conqueror to guardian of civilization, where power no longer galloped across grasslands but flowed quietly through canals, granaries, and academies, and each decision carried the weight of a continent's breath. In Khanbalik, a city of stone, silk, and scholar whispers, he balanced the restless heart of the steppe with the disciplined pulse of China's ancient soul. Attending courts where Confucian officials spoke in measured tones, Buddhist monks prayed in soft cadence, and Muslim advisors kept the empire's ledgers as precisely as astronomers charted stars. For here war was rare, but governance endless, and victory came not with swords, but with scrolls and systems.
Grain was stored for famine. Post stations stretched like lifelines across provinces. Merchants rode under Mongol protection from Persia to the Pacific, and printing presses multiplied knowledge faster than any horse could carry it, creating a world where cultures interlaced like silk threads, and peace, a strange yet welcome conquest, settled over lands that once knew only war. Yet even as prosperity blossomed, quiet tensions murmured beneath polished floors, old Song loyalists dreaming of restoration, Mongol nobles unsettled by life among walls instead of open sky, uneasy that their children learned calligraphy instead of archery, that sattles were traded for scholars' robes. And in these murmurs Kublai sensed the eternal dilemma of conquerors who built empires too grand to rule as warriors alone. Some nights he lay awake, recalling wind on the steppe and the rhythm of hooves that had once been his heartbeat, feeling the pull of a world that shaped him and the burden of a world he now shaped, knowing that stone outlasts tents but also slows the blood of those who dwell within. Still he pressed onward, determined to honor his grandfather's legacy not by endless conquest, but by creating a system where roads stayed safe, knowledge traveled free, and distant peoples lived under shared law rather than fear. And in this great turning of history, the Mongol dream reached its most luminous height, not in battle, but in order, commerce, learning, and the fragile miracle of stability across worlds once divided by mountains, deserts, and distrust. Yet even triumph casts a long shadow, and as the empire stood at its strongest, Kublai felt the first faint tremors of time, reminding him that no dynasty escapes the cycle of rise and fall. But for now, beneath lanterns glowing like small suns in palace halls, the great Khan turned emperor breathed deeply, ruling not by the storm of the horsemen, but by the steady light of empire.
But glory is never still, and as years settled along the ridges of Kublai's reign like snow on palace roofs, the first fractures whispered through the mighty edifice he built, subtle yet unmistakable, for even as silk caravans rolled unmolested across Asia, and scholars debated in courts gilded with jade and lacquer, the far-flung lands of the Mongol world tugged toward their own destinies. In the West, the Golden Horde cared little for Chinese rituals or bureaucratic restraint, preferring steppe winds to court incense, while the Ilkhanate in Persia drifted toward Islam and Persian culture, and Chagatai's descendants clung stubbornly to nomadic law, each branch of Genghis's blood carving its own path, loyal only to its memory of how empire should be ruled. And in China itself, burdens grew, floods demanded relief, famine strained granaries, currency inflation gnawed at markets, rebellions flickered like sparks along river provinces. And each crisis required a ruler once born to war to instead master patience, paperwork, and politics, a task even steel-willed Kublai felt in his bones. Yet the greatest sorrow rose not from subjects, but from family, as one by one his chosen heirs, meant to carry both bow and scepter into the future, died before him. First his son Genghis, whose promise of balancing Mongol spirit with Chinese governance faded with his final breath, then grandsons who fell like exhausted falcons, leaving the aging emperor staring at a future uncertain. For no empire collapses faster than one without a clear heir. Still he labored, issuing edicts, hearing petitions, expanding canals, fostering learning and faiths, determined to outlast grief through duty. Yet each passing winter carved heavier lines across his face. Each lost heir dimmed the fire that once echoed the thunder of cavalry,
until court gossip softened from awe to concern, and foreign envoys began to note a ruler whose shadow stretched long, not from rising power, but from its slow, inevitable setting. And so the twilight of his reign settled over the Yuan court, not with defeat, but with the weary dignity of a conqueror turned emperor who had traded the boundless freedom of the steppe for the heavy crown of settled rule. A man who once commanded horizons, now confined to marble halls, who held an empire together not by force of bow, but by force of will. Yet knowing deep within that while he built a world no Mongol before him could imagine, he also loosened the ties that bound the clans to the saddle, the very change that would one day test all that he forged.
Kublai Khan's final years unfolded not with the roar of conquest, but with the quiet weight of inevitability, for even emperors cannot command time. Illness crept upon him, gout swelled his limbs, and his once unyielding body, forged in the saddle, hardened by winter marches and war councils under starlit tents, now begged for rest, as court physicians burned incense, mixed herbs, prayed to Buddha, and consulted stars, yet none could return strength to the aging conqueror who once bridged worlds. And around him palace whispers twisted like incense smoke, ministers debating succession, princes maneuvering, factions sharpening silk-wrapped daggers of influence, for the Yuan court had grown vast, populated by Mongol nobles, Central Asian administrators, Chinese scholars, foreign envoys, Buddhist monks, Nestorian Christians, and Muslim astrologers, each pulling threads of power from different corners of the empire, while beyond palace walls floods strained resources. Peasant discontent flickered in the south, and distant Mongol ulus no longer looked to the great Khan with unquestioned loyalty. Yet, even diminished by age, Kublai's presence still commanded awe. His voice slow but firm, his will unbroken, his eyes remembering tundra winds, the thunder of hooves, the fierce purity of steppe life before gold, silk, and politics wrapped themselves around his legacy. He mourned losses that shaped him more than victories, the death of his beloved wife Chabi, the passing of trusted generals, the betrayal of rebels once sworn to him, and above all the heirs he buried, each one a promise extinguished, each funeral a reminder that a lineage powerful enough to conquer continents could not conquer fate. And so in 1294, in the palace at Khan Bailik, beneath carved dragons and brocaded banners, the emperor who had united China under the Yuan, who had ruled more land than any sovereign before him, who had welcomed the world into his court and made Mongol rule a global reality, breathed his last, not on horseback beneath the eternal blue sky like his grandfather, but on a bed of silk, surrounded by officials and monks, bearing a life that stretched from nomad tents to imperial palaces, a journey no other man in history had ever walked. After his death, the court named his grandson Temur as successor, yet the air trembled with uncertainty, for Kublai's passing marked more than the end of a reign. It marked the moment the Mongol Empire, once a single storm front racing across continents, became a patchwork of kingdoms tied by memory more than command. Caravans still moved, scholars still corresponded across lands, and maps still bore the Mongol stamp, but the pulse that unified them slowed, and in the silence left by the great Khan's final breath lay the truth of every empire. The world bends for the builder, then waits to see if his heirs can hold what he carved from destiny and earth.
After Kublai Khan's death, the empire he crowned with stone and silk did not shatter instantly. Empires rarely fall with a single crack. They sink slowly,
like a warhorse collapsing beneath exhaustion masked by armor. And the Yuan dynasty entered that long descent as Temujin, his grandson, inherited a throne heavy with glory but heavier still with strain. He honored his grandfather's legacy, maintained trade routes, upheld religious tolerance, sent envoys to distant courts, and kept Marco Polo's world connected a little longer. Yet beneath the imperial calm, fractures widened. Mongol nobles resented Chinese administrators, Chinese gentry resented Mongol rule, and famine and floods stirred the countryside as bureaucracy swelled and discipline thinned. A deadly mix for any empire, but fatal for one born in saddles and forged in fire. Far from Khanbalik, the other Mongol realms, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Ilkhanate in Persia, no longer looked to the Yuan throne with reverence, but as distant kin whose time of command had passed, and each pursued its own wars, alliances, and ambitions. A family once united by thunder, now drifting into rival storms. Temujin held the center for a time, but his successors lacked both the hunger of Genghis and the statecraft of Kublai. And one by one, the pillars that supported the dynasty buckled. Corruption seeped into offices once guarded by fear. Rebellions flickered in rice fields and canal towns. Silver shortages destabilized currency, officials demanded bribes, and court eunuchs whispered poison into power's ear as bureaucrats feuded while plague and harsh winters tested already strained granaries. To hide weakness, later Yuan rulers clung to pomp, parading golden dragons and imperial edicts while the foundations rotted like old timber beneath lacquered paint. And the steppe's proud riders, once masters of mobility, became palace-bound nobles who forgot the rhythm of horses and the harsh simplicity that had carried their ancestors across continents. In the countryside, secret societies spread, red turbans, white lotus followers, peasants with nothing to lose and everything to avenge, believing heaven had withdrawn its mandate from the foreign dynasty. And by the mid-1300s, revolt was not exception but momentum, rebellions rising like sparks until they burned together into wildfire. Armies loyal only in name crumbled, commanders betrayed one another, and in 1368, Zhu Yuangchang, a peasant-turned-general blessed not by birth but by chaos, marched into Khanbalik as the Mongols fled north to the steppe, abandoning stone cities for wind and grass once more, the Yuan dynasty falling not from a single blow, but from countless cuts, hunger, politics, pride, and time. Yet even in retreat, the Mongol story did not end, for they would rule again in Mongolia as the northern Yuan, their memory stamped across Eurasia, their legacy etched in trade routes, languages, governments, and the very maps of the world. And though the empire of their ancestors was gone, the idea forged by Genghis that borders could bend, cultures could mix, and power could reshape continents lived on long after hooves stopped shaking the earth, a reminder carved into history that no dynasty, no matter how vast, can escape the law even Genghis could not conquer. Empires are born from struggle, hardened by leadership, and undone when memory replaces hunger and inheritance dulls the steel of ambition.
While the Yuan crumbled in the east, and retreating horsemen carried imperial banners back to the grasslands, far to the west, the Ilkhanate, the Mongol realm carved from Persia and the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, walked its own path from conquest to decline, a mirror of glory fading by different hands. Hulagu had built his throne on the ashes of Baghdad and ruled with iron and tolerance, inviting astrologers, scholars, physicians, and engineers to strengthen his domain. blending Mongol discipline with Persian statecraft. Yet empire is not inheritance, but responsibility, and his successors inherited a sword sharper than their skill. Abaka fought to hold the realm together against Mamluk spears and internal unrest. Then came Teguda, who shocked Mongol nobles by converting fully to Islam and replacing steppe pragmatism with religious zeal, prompting backlash and execution, a reminder that sudden purity often destroys stability where tolerance once ruled. Arghun returned to Buddhism and diplomacy, sending envoys to Christian Europe, pleading for an alliance against the Mamluks. Letters carried to Rome, to France, to England. Kings and popes listening to promises of a Mongol Christian army reclaiming Jerusalem. Yet the dream dissolved in mistrust and delay, and nothing crossed the Mediterranean but parchment and hope. Ghazan followed, a ruler of brilliance, converting sincerely to Islam, but enforcing reform instead of fanaticism, stabilizing taxes, building irrigation, promoting scholars and science, proving that faith could guide without blinding. Yet even his competence could not erase the structural cracks: tribal rivalries, economic strain, shifting loyalties, and the age-old curse of succession. When Ghazan died young, his brother Uljaitu continued the effort, building the monumental city of Sultaniya and resting his empire on diplomacy and learning. But greatness in stone does not guarantee strength in steel. And when his son Abu Said lost the gamble of heirs, dying childless in 1335, the Ilkhanate fell not to invasion, but to vacuum. Princes feuded, generals carved fiefdoms, city lords seized power, and Persian bureaucrats watched Mongol command dissolve like dust in desert wind. One puppet Khan followed another, fragments of legitimacy scattered like arrows after battle, while emirs such as Choban and later Hassan-i Buzurg and the Jalayirids wrestled for control of once mighty provinces. In the chaos, Timur rose in Central Asia, not a descendant of Genghis Khan, but a master imitator of his methods. And though Timur would one day claim the legacy of the great Khan and carve empires in blood, the Ilkhanate's collapse proved a lesson older than any dynasty. War builds, but only governance preserves. And when the house of Genghis in Persia forgot balance between faith and law, tribute and compassion, ambition and stability, its walls fell to those who remembered. Yet the Mongol imprint on Persia did not fade with banners and titles. Administration modernized, arts flourished, sciences advanced. Persian became the language of courts from Anatolia to India, and Mongol horsemen married into Persian lineages, their blood flowing through future dynasties, their legacy shaping the rise of Timurids and Safavids, a quiet conquest through culture after conquest through steel. The Ilkhanate died, but its echoes rose in cities rebuilt, knowledge spread, and borders redrawn. Proof that even as empires fail, they do not disappear, they transform, they seed futures. And in Persia, the Mongols did not vanish, they became part of history's fabric, their legacy stitched into the world they once seized by force and later shaped by governance. A reminder again that the empire of Genghis never ended in a day, but dissolved into the nations it had created, changed, and forever marked.
In the heart of Central Asia, where Genghis Khan's earliest dreams galloped across open plains and caravans once shimmered like mirages along the Silk Road, the Chagatai Khanate, the realm entrusted to his second son Chagatai, conveyed the raw spirit of the steppe longer than most, yet it too would walk the path from unity to fracture and reinvention. Chagatai himself ruled with strict adherence to Yasa, fierce in judgment, unwavering in loyalty to his father's vision. presiding over Samarkand and Kashgar as Mongol horsemen enforced law with clarity and steel, but where warriors enforced order, merchants and craftsmen breathed prosperity, turning the region into a crossroads of trade, coin, and culture. After his death, however, the old question that haunted every branch of Genghis's lineage returned. Who could command loyalty without fear? Who could rule without betraying either the steppes or the cities that now fed their empire? And the Khanate wavered between rival claimants, tribal loyalties tugging against imperial duty like reins pulled by unsteady hands. Some Khans embraced Islam, others clung to shamanist heritage, and the realm split between nomadic East and settled West, a divide not born in hatred but in lifestyle, yet sharp enough to carve the Khanate into competing courts. Transoxiana's urban centers demanding order, taxation, and diplomacy, and the eastern steppes insisting on freedom, grazing rights, and warrior law. In this tension, power rose and collapsed like tents in sudden wind. Kaidu, the fierce grandson of Ogedei, challenged Kublai from these lands, waging decades of war that kept Central Asia in constant strain, refusing to bow to the Sinicized empire in the east and embodying the last thunder of old nomadic pride. Yet even his defiance could not forge lasting unity, and after his fall, rulers cycled rapidly, factions multiplied, and loyalty dissolved into ambition. Still, the land did not sleep. Scholars wrote, poets recited, traders crossed deserts, and Sufi mystics spread faith and learning, while Mongol nobles married into Turkic and local families, creating a blended elite whose identity shifted from pure steppe ancestry to a fusion that would shape the future of the region. By the mid-14th century, the Khanate splintered fully, eastern Mogolistan and western Transoxiana drifting apart, and into this fractured world rose a man not born to Genghis's line, but determined to wield its legacy. Timur, the iron-willed emir of Samarkand, claiming descent through marriage and loyalty rather than blood, turning the Chagatai name into a banner he borrowed, reshaped, and eventually overshadowed through conquest and terror. Yet even as Timur marched to carve his own empire, the Chagatai realm left marks on history deeper than fading borders. It preserved the Mongol legal tradition for generations, safeguarded Silk Road commerce until chaos overtook stability, blended Turkic and Mongol identities, and carried the language that would evolve into Chagatai Turkic, the literary tongue of Central Asia for centuries, spoken by emperors of the future Mughal court in India, and poets who carved beauty from nomad memory and city stone. The Khanate did not fall in one day nor vanish in defeat. It transformed, passing its spirit into new rulers, its blood into new dynasties, and its culture into a world that would one day birth Timur, Babur, and the Mughal Empire. Proof that even fragmented, the legacy of Genghis in Central Asia did not die. It adapted, whispered across steppes and minarets, lingering in every caravan bell and war drum, a silent current carrying the memory of the wolf's empire forward into new ages and new thrones.
As the Chagatai Khanate splintered and Timur rose from the ashes of fractured Central Asia, the Golden Horde in the northwest also faced the slow erosion of unity. Batu's descendants holding sway over Russia and the Eurasian steppe, yet generations removed from the original Khan, their power challenged by local princes, internal rivalries, and the pressures of administering vast lands while still maintaining the martial culture that had built the empire. From the Volga to the Don, Khans struggled to collect tribute, command loyalty, and suppress rebellions. And though they remained formidable in war, their influence became regional rather than global, a shadow of the unstoppable force Genghis had created, while commerce and diplomacy flowed under the Mongol name but often beyond their control. As merchants, envoys, and armies navigated politics that had grown more intricate than any single Khan could oversee. In Persia, the Ilkhanate, once a united and disciplined realm, fractured after Abu Sa'id's death, leaving a vacuum of power exploited by amirs, generals, and local dynasties. The Mongol rulers there slowly absorbed into Persian culture, adopting religion, language, and administration, transforming conquest into legacy rather than domination. The Yuan dynasty in China continued under successors of Kublai, but weakening central authority, corruption, natural disasters, famine, and peasant uprisings chipped away at imperial control, culminating in the Red Turban Rebellion, and eventually Zhu Yuanzong's armies marched into Khanbalik in 1368, ending the Yuan in China proper, while the northern Yuan in Mongolia persisted in relative obscurity, retaining nomadic traditions and claiming the title of Great Khan, yet their reach was confined to the steppe. Across the former empire, no single line of Genghis's descendants could replicate the clarity, vision, or unity of the founder. And yet the Mongol imprint endured: law, trade routes, cultural exchange, military organization, and a vision of Eurasia connected by networks of power, commerce, and communication, leaving a legacy where borders had been redrawn, peoples mixed, and ideas flowed in ways no conqueror before or since had achieved. A reminder that even as empires fragment and fall, their echoes shape centuries to come, and Genghis Khan's name continued to resonate as a symbol of both unity and the limits of human ambition, a wolf whose howl never entirely faded across the steppes and into the world beyond.
And so the story of the Mongol Empire reaches its final horizon, stretching from the windswept steppes of Mongolia to the walls of China, from the deserts of Persia to the forests of Russia, a testament to a vision that began with one boy abandoned, hardened by hunger and betrayal, who became Genghis Khan, the unifier of tribes and master of the world. Yet even he could not stop the slow flow of time. The empires he built persisted, fragmented, adapted, and transformed, the Yuan dynasty eventually falling to rebellion and dynastic change in China, the Ilkhanate dissolving into competing Persian and Central Asian states, the Ogedei Khanate splintering and giving rise to new powers like Timur and the Mughal Empire, and the Golden Horde drifting into regional principalities. Yet across continents and centuries, the Mongol legacy endured, encoded in law, trade, military strategy, administration, and the very idea that a single vision could span Eurasia. Rulers after Genghis and Kublai were mortal. Heirs disputed succession, nobles rebelled, peasantry resisted, and cultures mingled in ways neither conqueror nor scholar could fully predict. Yet the connections they left behind, the Silk Road alive with commerce, communication networks stretching thousands of miles, diplomatic channels, shared knowledge, religious tolerance, and blended societies transformed the world permanently. In the hearts of descendants, in the languages they spoke, in the cities they rebuilt, in the borders they redrew, echoes of the Wolf Empire persisted,
a reminder that empires rise on courage, strategy, and vision, but endure only through adaptation. And in the end, Genghis Khan, the boy of the steppe who rose from betrayal to mastery, left behind a lesson older than conquest itself. Power is fleeting, death inevitable, yet ideas, institutions, and the bonds forged across deserts, mountains, rivers, and plains can outlast every horse, every arrow, every throne, and even the man who first dreamed them. And so, the Mongol Empire, once the largest land empire in history, passed into memory and legend, its story carried on the wind, the hoofbeats of horses, the ink of scribes, and the whispers of generations, a world shaped forever by the ambition, discipline, and vision of one extraordinary man, whose shadow, long and unbroken, still stretches across the pages of history, reminding all who follow that empires are born from vision, thrive on unity, and ultimately live on in the legacy left behind.